Joining us now to speak more about what's going on with the AFN is former AFN Regional Chief for Manitoba, Kevin Hart, and Russ Diabo, a longtime critic of the AFN, who also ran for National Chief in 2018. Gentlemen, thanks both of you for being with us here. First off, I'd like to get your take on the attempted suspension of AFN National Chief RoseAnne Archibald and the plan to bar her from attending the upcoming annual General Assembly in Vancouver. Kevin, let's start with you.
I think right now we have a current situation where we have a national chief that's not in the office. There's so many issues that are affecting First Nation communities right now that have not been addressed, resolved, or spoken to by the national office, and this has been neglected to this fiasco that we see before us right now. The national office has been silent. It has not really been a voice without a plan to address anything critical that has happened in this past year for us as First Nations people. The result is that we see right now over 10,000 unmarked graves across Canada with no voice. We have a papal apology coming forward where there is a lot of mixed reaction and emotions from survivors across this country. We have climate change in the environment affecting us, the high gas prices that are only going to impact us as the most marginalized people in this country as First Nations due to the food insecurity and the high cost in the north and on First Nations across this country. So what we're seeing right now is that we have a national chief, but under the current leadership, we have no leadership.
Russ, what are your thoughts? The national chief says that the executive doesn't have, the authority to suspend her. But what are your thoughts on this suspension and an attempt to bar her from attending the upcoming AGA?
Well, first, let me say that since 2015, the Assembly of First Nations has been increasingly a tool of the federal government in terms of policy and legislative development. They've signed memorandums of understanding on a new fiscal relationship and on joint priorities. And so the current national chief has inherited, 8 years of what the previous national chief did with the organization to turn it into basically a branch office of the federal government. I think it would be pretty hard for her to single-handedly turn that around. But in terms of the executive committee suspending her and forbidding her to speak at the assembly, I think she's they have definitely overreached their authority. The AFN charter is subject to interpretation, but she's an elected official. And for, the executive, regardless of what she said that they don't like, for them to suspend her, it's the first time in the history of AFN that they've done that to the first female national chief. And ultimately, it's the chiefs in assembly who are in charge of the executive committee and in charge of the national chief. And to forbid her from going to state her case there to the assembly is, I think, very unfair. And I understand right now regional chiefs are meeting today with their chiefs in different regions to decide if it's going to be business as usual or if they're going to delay the assembly, which of course will have economic and political consequences if they do that.
I have reached out to the AFN, still haven't heard back on whether there is a possible delay or cancellation of the AGA coming. Russ, the budget of the AFN has basically quadrupled since Trudeau took office. Archibald's calling for a forensic audit of the Assembly of First Nations. Do you think that is necessary?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, the relationship between AFN and the federal government, like I said, has been very cozy. Even when I ran for national chief, I was pointing that out. But since 2018, they dissolved the Department of Indian Affairs and created 2 new departments. And, the relationship, fiscally, it shows when there's cooperation with AFN is well funded. I worked for National Chief Ovid McCready at a time when it was on a shoestring budget because he was fighting with the federal government. So the budgets of AFN kind of raise and fall depending on whether the federal government feels they can use the Assembly of First Nations or not.
Kevin, you were with the AFN for a number of years. Do you feel that there's a need for a forensic audit, as the National Chief is calling for?
I believe that at my time, when I was the regional chief for the Manitoba region, if you look at it, it encompasses Treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and one of the members from Treaty 6. As a regional chief, I was immediately assigned portfolios and such that included, infrastructure, water, some of the most critical issues that we're talking about of the day, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and we see that right now. In my region right now, we have women that are disappearing every week. We just recently had a young Indigenous woman found in the Lady Brady landfill here in Winnipeg, and that has impacted our families time and time again. We've had no voice from the national office because of that. For myself as an executive, we're all under oath to not only be the regional chiefs from our immediate regions that we represent and are elected by our chiefs, but also the same for the national chief. The national chief is duly elected through the chiefs in assembly. And I believe that for this to come to a resolve and such that the chiefs in assembly have to deal with it, the Confederacy has to deal with this, as well as working with the parameters of the charter. But we also have to remember that there is indeed a corporate structure to the AFN that we as regional chiefs and the national chief sit on as a board. So you have to look at those parameters too. Moving forward, I think that once the dust has settled that and we're moving forward in a good, positive way, in a healthy way, together as we as First Nations people have always done, in good ways, in ceremony, with our elders, with our women, with our men and our youth involved as well too. We have to ensure, and I think that Russ would say the same thing, that the charter is followed, and that we have to look at the corporate structure and the entity that's there too. I think this is of the utmost importance right now, is that for us and for myself, when I was the regional chief with 12 portfolios at the AFN level, it's so important to rely on your team. It's so important to rely on your staff for you that have these critical portfolios. And that if there's problems with staff, they need to be addressed. I think that this needs to be done here in this case. In the same boat, if we have people that are bringing forward claims of bullying, intimidation, and harassment, then yes, we as an executive have to take that seriously as well too. And it has to be investigated, it has to be vetted out, and those reports need to be shared with the chiefs and the chiefs in assembly so that all the information could be there and that everybody can come to a conclusion from there, and then we work on a path moving forward.
Gentlemen, we're very much over time here. Just very quickly, Russ, starting with you, how do you see this playing out with the national chief?
Well, I think that the chiefs in assembly, if that Vancouver meeting goes ahead, I think they need to address this. The problem is the bodies of AFN haven't followed the charter. The Confederacy of Nations hasn't met in years. And in fact, the first resolution that was to be dealt with in Vancouver was to amend the charter to remove that body from the charter. And it was supposed to, the charter was in place to, ensure transparency and accountability of the AFN executive and national chief. But once you get rid of that body, it's only every 6 months that there's an assembly or special assembly. So really it rests with the chiefs in assembly to figure out if they're going to do an oversight committee or how they're going to manage this.
Kevin, very quickly, what do you see as happening here in the weeks ahead?
The weeks ahead, I believe that under the guidance, direction of, again, as Russ has indicated, our regional chiefs are meeting across the country with their respected chiefs. They get direction from their chiefs in assembly from their respected regions as well too. And then moving forward, if we do come to meet in Vancouver, then we will be on the floor and we'll watch how the chiefs work to move forward. Because, like I said again, we have a national office right now that doesn't have a voice. There's so many critical issues right now that are affecting our people, and it has no leadership there at the present moment. So we need to ensure that this is dealt with by the chiefs in the assembly and that we get clear direction moving forward.
Kevin, Russ, we'll have to leave it there, but hopefully we'll be gathering again to speak about this. Appreciate both of you.
Thank you.
Take care.